The season finale of Andor is a tension-filled, action-packed adventure that by the end somehow leaves you asking, where's the rest of it? Hi y'all, Snarky J Cosplay here. Episode 12 of Andor premiered on Disney Plus today, concluding the first season of the most criminally underrated Star Wars show to date. While I thought this episode was absolutely brilliant and worked as a great conclusion to a fantastic season, it had great dialogue, some real nail-biting moments throughout the entire thing, it did leave me scratching my head a little unsatisfied with how abruptly it felt like it ended, and it also didn't answer all of my questions. I do admit that I have to take this fact with a grain of salt, being that season 2 of Andor is already confirmed, and it's set to take us all the way to the Battle of Yavin, which should leave us with a pretty satisfying conclusion leading up to Rogue One. But in my opinion, it just felt like season 1 ended sort of oddly. It felt like the audience got yanked right out of the action in one of the strangest possible moments, so to me it felt a little open-ended in a kind of uncomfortable way. For that reason, I'm rating the final episode of season 1 of Andor a solid 8 out of 10. So let's get into the real meat and potatoes of where this episode went and where it left us regarding this entire season. From this point on, there will be spoilers for episode 12 of Andor. You've been warned. Now, the main event that sparks all the action and all the drama in this episode, as expected, is Cassian's mother Marva'S funeral, which I'm gonna get into shortly, but for right now, let's talk Mon Mothma. So throughout this entire series, we've really seen her struggle with her place in the Senate. She's quietly waging a political battle against the Empire, trying to fight Imperial overreach, and also trying to bring to light some of the cruelties that the Empire is imposing on the people it subjugates. She's known this whole time that this has made her a nuisance, and it also hasn't made her a whole lot of friends. In one of the earlier episodes, she mentioned that her beloved driver was replaced with somebody who she assumed was an Imperial spy. And this episode gives us this absolutely delicious little glimpse into just how good Mon Mothma's skills are at espionage. While she's leaving an event with her husband Perrin, she picks a fight about his gambling. Now, we haven't heard about him gambling this entire series, but we can assume that it's been a problem in the past. She knows her driver is eavesdropping and starts questioning Perrin about where he's getting the money from and starts a real big argument about it. And the driver, of course, is listening to all this, and we do see him later report back to Supervisor Blevin, you know, Dedra Meero's good friend, and tells him everything that's been said. I will admit that for a minute there I was actually kind of lost. I thought that this was in fact spousal drama, but this is the perfect ploy. Mon Mothma needs a way to cover up those 400,000 credits, and she needs all the suspicious movements in her bank to make sense. Well, what better way than to throw your shady husband under the bus and say that he's the guy that's gambling and moving money around and how concerned you are about it. Her driver Cloris buys the whole thing, as does Supervisor Blevin. This entire front works beautifully, just as Mon Mothma planned. By throwing her husband under the bus, she's got a brilliant cover for those 400,000 credits and possibly an even better cover moving forward. I also want to mention a little Easter egg in her argument. She tells him that she doesn't want him gambling in Coruscant, but suggests he go to Canto Bight. Of course, Canto Bight is in fact the city in episode 8, The Last Jedi, where rich people go to bet on like dog races, gamble, and engage in a whole bunch of other seedy activities. Honestly, this entire scene to me was genius, and it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, because I think Perrin is kind of a D-bag, so I'm totally glad that his wife is willing to let him burn. Now, this aside, the last time we see Mon Mothma in this episode is when she's actually having a meeting. It's her husband Perrin, and her daughter Lita all meeting up with Davo Skulldon, his wife, and their son. Meaning she took that deal the way we all kind of already assumed she was going to. Honestly, part of me felt bad for her daughter in this occasion, but when you look at her, when you look at like the nuance in her face, she's got this sort of subtle air of defiance, and as somebody who's been a petty teenage girl before, I know the look entirely too well. And so she looks almost like she's willing to go into this betrothal just to bother her mom, in which case, you know what? Good luck with that. Mon Mothma's home life by the end of this episode and this season is in shambles, but she is well on her way to becoming one of the biggest heroes of this rebellion, so I gotta say, the sacrifice, worth it. Now, on to the main event. We already knew Cassian was not going to miss his mother's funeral, and Dedra Meero bet on the same. So the ISB has essentially negotiated with the people of Ferrix in order to allow them to have a funeral. And they've set up all kinds of limitations. They've had to negotiate how many people can attend. The cap is 40 in this case, where exactly it can be held, how long it can be, all these different limitations that seem like Imperial hardassery. It'll seem that way to the people of Ferrix, which is really important because when you're constantly under somebody else's boot, you'll have to turn to your neighbor and really kind of commiserate and come together. And that's going to be really important when it comes to seeing how the people of Ferrix react to Imperial actions further in the episode. Now, like I said, it might seem like Imperial hardassery, I'm coining that term. It's really not. It's because Dedra Meero and the ISB want to limit this funeral in order to set up a trap for Cassian Andor. They've got lines of officers in what looks like really common SWAT gear, sort of waiting with shields, and they've blocked off a big area. And this funeral ends up being one of the most tension-filled, high-energy moments of the entire series. The people of Ferrix already start out defiant. They begin the funeral way ahead of schedule, and this throws the entire Imperial plan off. While this could be seen as just an act of defiance toward the Empire, I think it's way less about an act of defiance by the people towards the Empire, and more like we're defying you because we're honoring this woman who definitely would not agree with us having to agree with you. Interestingly enough, they've got a marching band, and it's a marching band of modified real instruments. I'm an ex-band kid, and half of these were just flutes with a bunch of extra stuff bolted onto them, which I still thought was kind of interesting. While they play, it's Brasso holding the brick of Marva'S ashes, leading the way with B2 Emo to the spot that's going to become a hot spot for the rebellion. B2 Emo flashes a hologram message from Marva, which she recorded before she died. And her message here is basically that they have ignored the Empire. They've kind of just dealt with them and gone about their business, and she stresses what a big mistake this is. And as she starts getting ramped up and people are really kind of delving into what it is that she's saying, she literally ends this holo message by telling them to fight those bastards, to fight the Empire. And while I'm completely shocked, one of the officers comes over and kicks B2 Emo, ending the transmission, which, by the way, that guy's on my shit list now. You do not assault that droid, he's a national treasure. This single act of kicking over a droid sparks an entire riot between the people of Ferrix and the ISB officers in the area. I want to stress, throughout the first few parts of the episode, interwoven, we saw a young man putting together some kind of odd device. This device ends up being a bomb. And the young man putting it together was none other than Pack's son. If you remember, Pack is the guy that had that radio transmitter thing that Bix was using, and he got tortured and killed by the ISB for his aid. And so this device, created by his son, was obviously created for this purpose. I don't think everybody at this funeral thought that this riot was gonna erupt this way. But regardless, think about this. Pack's son showed up to a funeral with this bomb already in his pocket. I don't think that was a just in case. And I think this is a great point about how extreme cruelty breeds extremism. It's after this bomb detonates that Imperial officers decide to open fire. We see a bunch of common citizens being tased, shot, assaulted, but most importantly, we actually see one of Cassian's friends, Zan. He actually is shot, hits the ground, and we get several seconds of his face up close as we can hear the carnage, but we're just staring at his blank, dead face. It's uncomfortable how long it lasts on the screen, and it's just another reminder of what a big sacrifice all these people are willing to pay in order to fight the Empire. And it's also a reminder of how cruel the Empire is, because most of these civilians are completely unarmed. Granted, they're pretty good fighters, and I do want to mention that somebody headbutts a stormtrooper and the stormtrooper falls over. What is the point of wearing a helmet if when you get headbutted, you're still gonna get knocked out? Why are they even in this armor anymore? You know what? That's not the point. Again, one of my biggest issues with this episode was that I didn't quite feel closure, and the big driver of this lack of closure is the fact that they don't show us how this riot plays out. They don't show us how it ends. But in thinking about it further, I think that this was very much a writing tool on their part. Think about an event like the Boston Massacre, which is one of the many events that led up to the American Revolution. It started as a street brawl between a single British soldier and some American colonists, and it resulted in a bunch of bloodshed, dead, unarmed people, including one child, and it gave the Americans an extra spark. It really made them believe how cruel British colonialism was, and it drove so much propaganda and so much rage that it's actually considered one of the biggest pushes forward for the American Revolution. Look at this episode. This was a funeral. This was an occasion for grieving citizens, friends, family, all to come together and mourn and honor somebody that was a pillar of their community. And a basically irrelevant message left by a now dead old woman somehow justifies a bunch of unarmed civilians being shot in the street. This event is very much along the lines of the Boston Massacre, where we're definitely in season 2 gonna see this be a spark for more anti-imperial sentiment, and I'm so excited to see where this goes moving forward. So I will have to sort of agree that this door was best left open and open-ended. Now, a big thing I really want to discuss here are the major differences in how we leave off Dedra Meero and Cassian Andor. We've watched Dedra Meero climb the ladder of success in the ISB since the season started, and she's been completely unwavering in the dedication to her cause and the cruelty towards the people that the Empire is sort of supposed to serve. We even see her show up in Ferrix with her own personal Death Troopers. I want to mention this as relevant because the first time we saw Death Troopers was actually in Rogue One, and they're basically an elite variation of stormtroopers that specialize in espionage, stealth, and complete lethality. It goes to show just how cruel and how willing she is to do anything to reach that goal. As uptight and terrible as she's been this entire series though, this episode treats us to a little something new from her: fear. We rarely ever see Imperial officers really get kicked around or really get scared. We saw some of it in the big prison break 2 episodes ago, but this is something different. Dedra is knocked on her face on the ground, and she's actually screaming and frantic, and the only reason she gets away is because her favorite simp, Cyril Karn, comes and rescues her. And it's so satisfying because sure, we didn't see her get trampled, which some of us might have wanted. Seeing her get knocked off her pedestal literally is super satisfying. And honestly, for the next season, I'm assuming that we're gonna see some kind of weird romance, if you can call it that, bloom between Cyril and Dedra, but either way, I'm actually looking forward to seeing how this ends up for her in season 2. Now, Cassian Andor, on the other hand, starts this series off as a hired gun. After being in prison for so long and having to escape, Cassian is back on the horse, so to speak, at the beginning of this episode. He comes to Ferrix for his mother's funeral. He actually succeeds in helping Bix escape that hotel that she's been kept imprisoned in. But more importantly, we see him really become one with the true passion of the rebellion. Not only do we get snippets of Nemik's manifesto, which he's been listening to and clearly starting to believe in. This manifesto does a brilliant job of encouraging people, including Cassian, to try and fight off tyranny, and he actually reminds people to do something interesting, to try, which kind of goes against this message.
Do or do not. There is no try.
But I like Nemik's better. So not only is Cassian really listening to this manifesto, but he's also given the last message that his mother left for him. Marva spoke to Brasso on her deathbed and told him that she wanted him to tell Cassian that she always knew that he would be an unstoppable force for good. Everything that Cassian has experienced over this entire season is somehow now further justified by his mother's dying words and by Nemik's manifesto. Our seedy gunslinger is now an impassioned rebel, making sure that his friends get off planet and going back to finish business. The ending of the interaction between Cassian and Luthen in this episode that also wraps up the season as a whole really had me sort of shocked. When Cassian gets back to Luthen, and he actually succeeded in sneaking up on him, which I thought was a brilliant touch, he tells him, "Take me in or kill me," and he's actually already left him with his blaster there. But Luthen doesn't even really answer. He gives him this knowing smirk, and we fade to black right there. That look from Luthen, for me, is respect. He knew this guy as a hired gun at the beginning, but knew that he was something special and something he could mold into something better. And in this, Luthen is seeing that this petty thief, this scam artist, this hired gun, has now turned into a seasoned rebel capable of sneaking up on even himself. He knows Cassian is the real deal, and I'm sure season 2 is really gonna show us these two moving forward now as a duo. So on one hand, you have Dedra Meero, an Imperial cog who is impassioned by cruelty and power, and this harrowing experience with the civilians on Ferrix didn't teach her any lessons. In fact, it looks like it's only gonna be fuel to her fire in wanting to further crush these people. On the other hand, you have Cassian Andor, a man who has stood for nothing, has lost everything, but in this process has gained a fighting spirit and a desire to see the rebellion win that is going to be powerful enough that he'll eventually give his life for. And this is character development that is rarely ever seen in Star Wars media. It's really two sides of a coin that is painted beautifully by well-written scripts and brilliant performances. The last thing I want to get into in this specific episode is exactly what it is that happens in that post-credits scene. We get another glimpse of those parts that Cassian was building with his colleagues in prison, and it turns out that these are all pieces going into the Death Star. It's ironic in such a powerful way. In prison, Cassian Andor was building components of the weapon that will eventually kill him and his rebel allies, but he won't die without leaving that Death Star his final word, because he'll have died all in the name of leaving the Rebel Alliance with the plans to destroy said weapon. We do still have some unanswered questions in regards to this season. The biggest one for me is where exactly Cassian Andor's sister is. I almost forgot that was a plot point entirely, but we started the series with him looking for his sister from Kenari, and Marva later tells him to stop looking for her, that it's a lost cause, but I have to assume that this sister of Cassian's is still out there and will probably be a plot point in season 2. The ending of season 1 of Andor was absolutely incredible. I thoroughly enjoyed all 50 some odd minutes, and I've thought every single episode of this series was worth watching. This is a beyond underrated series, and I really hope that these supposed low viewership numbers don't discourage Lucasfilm and Disney from making more shows like this. That's all from me. I've been Snarky J. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on the season finale of Andor in the comments below.